Good evening and thanks for joining us on the Week in Review. I'm Nick Blumberg. More than 100 former federal prosecutors say Chicago's U.S. Attorney Andrew Boutros has tarnished the office.
He's the leader of the office, and so, the buck stops with him. It stopped with every U.S. attorney that I ever served under.
The collapse of the Broadview Six case amid alleged prosecutor misconduct leads to charges against 2 defendants being dropped in the Loretto Hospital fraud prosecution.
The only way to truly serve a student is to understand and embrace what makes each student and community unique.
Chicago Public Schools CEO Macquline King stands up for the district's inclusive policies in a combative Capitol Hill hearing.
They didn't show up for the end of session. You got to work the hallways, as you know, in a very, very busy session. You've got to really talk to every legislator if you want to get something done.
Governor J.B. Pritzker says despite some of the Bears' fumbles in seeking a stadium bill, he's happy to call a special session this summer. Meantime, a burning cross in Grant Park causes alarm and outrage. And 2 days of powerful storms, including reported tornadoes, wallop parts of Illinois, Indiana, and Wisconsin. And now to our Week in Review panel. Joining us are Alden Lowry of WBEZ, A.D. Quigg of the Chicago Tribune, Sasha Ann Simons, also of WBEZ, and freelance journalist Brandon Pope. Thank you all for being here. Let's get right to it. As we mentioned, the Chicago area and beyond, 2 days of really damaging storms. I mean, heavy rain, high winds, some tornadoes reported. As of earlier this afternoon, some 140,000 ComEd customers still without power. What were things like where each of you were?
Ooh, my power just came back on yesterday.
No
okay.
way.
Yeah, which is pretty wild. I was on a podcast and it just went all black.
Oh, it's never a fun feeling in the middle of recording something.
It wasn't, and I was hot. I was really going. The worst possible moment.
It's always when you're cooking that things get cut off.
Yeah.
No problem with the power for me, but I had a friend that was bringing something to me, I think it was Wednesday evening, and they were telling me about how they had to weave a completely different route because of all the trees that were blocking a number of different roadways. So.
Yeah, I'm in the South Shore neighborhood, and it was pretty bad. Trees down, a lot of traffic lights out. As we speak right now, there's a massive tree outside my house that's still down, and there's a Mazda belonging to my neighbor across the street that's stuck underneath it.
Oh,
so, yeah.
I
sadly lost 3 potted plants.
Hey, that's a tragedy unto
Huge tragedy,
itself.
but no tree limbs on my car. But there was a tree limb that fell the first night. City came, took care of it. Another one fell. Again, exact same spot. Poor car crushed.
Yeah, I'm on the 3rd floor on a very heavily tree-lined street, and there is a branch that is quite precarious that has not come down, but I'm just waiting for a crew to come by and take it because it's like another stiff wind and it's done.
Yeah, the city's OMC, Emergency Management Communications, issued a press release this week saying like over 12,000 essentially reports of downed trees. And just for context, when we had the derecho, if I pronounced that correctly, a couple of years back, there were maybe about 4,000 of those reports over a 3-day period. So we were really hit hard.
Yeah, and obviously, homes and buildings leveled, all throughout Northwest Indiana, Northeastern Illinois, Southern Wisconsin, so a pretty intense system that came through, and hopefully that'll be the last of it. I'm sure no more summer storms.
From your lips to God's ears.
We'll knock on wood on that one. All right, Brandon, more than 100 ex-federal prosecutors signing a letter very sharply criticizing U.S. Attorney Andrew Boutros. Were you surprised to see them take such a public stand in this way?
Well, no, when you think about the tone and tenor of what's happened overall with this Northern District office, but also nationally with the Department of Justice. This is a big number here coming out and questioning the leadership in the department itself, concerns about the future of the department and getting young prosecutors to come into the office in the future. They stopped short of calling for a resignation, so to speak, which was very interesting itself, but sharply questioning the judgment of Andrew Boutros, and we're seeing just this quick unraveling overall. Not just this case, there's a bank fraud case that's also being unraveled here and under the microscope because of the prosecutors that may have been involved there. And then, as we're going to talk about here soon, the Loretto Hospital case.
Yeah, I was a little bit surprised that they didn't quite go as far as resignation.
It's a lot of sharp words and tough talk. I guess he's being very defiant here and saying he's not going to resign, We also know that President Trump is probably not going to call for his resignation. It all, once again, calls into question what many have wondered. Is the department being weaponized politically? Has that impartiality the courts are supposed to maintain disappeared overall? When you look at these transcripts that have come out and you read through those, at the questions that were lobbied to these grand jurors, it raises questions for sure.
Yeah, how about those grand jury transcripts, Alden, that we saw in the Broadview Six case? One of the grand jurors referring to something as a crock with another couple words on there. I mean, as a layperson reading some of these accounts, it certainly appears like there's potential prosecutor misconduct there. I mean, what was your reaction?
Yeah, I mean, the Judge April Perry, I think, said it pretty plainly. This was some of the most egregious examples. She said she was very troubled by what she saw. And this is a process that is largely really kind of out of view for a lot of lay people, as you're saying. And so the fact that this is the beginning of the process, right? And supposedly these folks just, in the district, wherever this is taking place, and, do we have enough to bring charges? And people were pushing back repeatedly in this particular case, and the vouching that was done allegedly by Mecklenburg, hey, I wouldn't bring this case forward if we didn't believe that we had something strong here. Just really raises questions about whether or not there is something more that's motivating this beyond the details and the facts of the case.
And when you read through that too, there are almost some perceived threats, like, hey, if you have some issues with how
There's
you
the
feel
door
about,
kind of thing.
there's
Right.
the door right there, and that right there is raising a lot of questions about the impartiality itself too. That's kind of leading on the jurors. You're not really supposed to do that.
Well,
Yeah.
the attorney for the Broadview Six basically said that's problematic on its own, but the cover-up is as bad. So they knew that it was wrong. They attempted to hide it from the judge. That's as problematic as the vouching that they saw in the transcripts.
Yeah, if they hadn't gone through and made all these redactions and perhaps, copped to some of this stuff and said, okay, maybe we crossed the line here a little bit, that's one thing. But yeah, the cover-up is often worse than the potential crime.
It also doesn't help when you have a prosecutor say literally, well, I'm not supposed to do this.
Right. I never do this, but not necessarily a great look. And as we mentioned, AD, the fallout from this going beyond Broadview 6, there's the Loretto COVID fraud case, 2 defendants seeing their charges dropped, key executives trial looking to be delayed. I mean, the reporting from Block Club and other folks on this has been pretty extensive. It certainly seemed like there was
A tight case.
Yeah, I mean, is this prosecutors fumbling here?
I would say so if they already basically agreed to drop it against the 2. Yeah. We'll see how the rest plays out. But yes, I think it's a lot of harried concern. Yeah. And this is especially notable for this office, which for years as reporters we've known to be really the hammer against corruption in Illinois for decades and decades. So the fact that this happened in the first place and that the fallout has been so immediate is really noteworthy.
Yeah, huge reputational damage here, and yeah, as Brandon mentioned, could affect the pipeline of folks coming into the office.
This case, as Block Club and other publications have reported on, affected so many people involved. Tens of millions of federal dollars misused, maybe hundreds of millions of federal dollars misused on COVID testing at a crucial time in the pandemic. So the scale of the potential fraud that could be found here, if that case falls apart, that has big implications.
A crucial time and a vulnerable time. If you remember 2020, just how much we relied on COVID testing and just all the different places. I know I traveled, I'm sure some folks tried to travel as well, and just the sheer need to do so. So I can definitely see myself and others falling victim to fake tests.
Oh yeah, and at such a critical safety net institution like
You're
Loretto.
Going to Loretto.
Yeah.
Why would you think that
Which
there's
benefits
any
a lot
issue?
of low-cost people too.
Yes.
You're really preying on the vulnerable with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, be interesting to see what happens with the remaining charges in that case. Sasha, shifting gears, CPS CEO Macquline King was grilled in a congressional hearing about things like the district's Black Student Success Plan, its gender-affirming policies. From what you saw of and read about her testimony, did it seem like she held firm in this environment that's really designed to knock her off her game?
Yeah, I think she did. They did make it tough for her, though. The Republican members of Congress who were grilling her were very much, I think, just on their own agenda to expose her in some way, right, and expose the district in some way for wrongdoing, for which, in reality, we know it's just having, inclusive policies for transgender students, having sex ed curriculums that are inclusive, but they, accused her of things like having a hyper-sexed whatever that means, hypersex curriculum, and so she held her ground. She maintained that the district was in compliance with the law, and there was nothing wrong with how we were creating a safe space for children to learn and environments for them to be one with their peers that come from different lived experiences.
Well, and of course, as she pointed out, many of these policies are a result of state law, that these aren't necessarily CPS coming in and saying this, they're things that supersede the district.
Right, and so I think she held her own. I think as a new CEO for the district, very new to the job, I don't expect her to do much more than what she displayed in Washington.
Yeah, and obviously not necessarily a hearing designed to get answers as much as maybe to make some political points.
Sure.
AD, the deal Chicagoans love to hate, our privatized parking meter deal. There's a group of alders coming out saying they're going to block a sale of the meters to a different investment firm that's proposed, not necessarily because of the sales terms, but because they say the mayor withheld information. What do we know?
It's not so much the deal itself, which we all know and hate.
I mean, speak for yourself. I think it's fine.
We love it.
We love it. You're an employee of Lad's Parking.
It's fine.
She has Dubai ties that we don't know.
Right.
It was more about the notification period that City Council should have had about the details of the sale itself. Council saying they should have had 60 days to read and consider this, and the mayor only gave them a scant amount of time. They're pushing back against that.
Alden, this is sort of another in a string of stories we've seen about the back and forth between the mayor and council. From your read of the situation, is this a personality clash, or was this a real sort of gap in what the mayor's administration should have done here?
Well, I would say yes to both those things. I think there is very clearly, Mayor Johnson has not been on good terms with the council for, almost since his inception in the office. And I think there's also this sense that, here's a very difficult situation in terms of the city's finances, and the mayor's looking for literally any idea to bring in new revenue. And I think the thought was, can we get this ball rolling perhaps before we can, kind of get into a debate around this? Not that he was necessarily trying to pull this one over, but I think there might have been a little strategy behind what he was doing.
I thought it was interesting the Johnson administration responds like, oh, no, we weren't saying that was the deadline.
Right.
It's just the date by which we need to have an update.
Yeah. Right.
It's like, no, sir, we need more time.
Yeah.
The question is that the deadline he gave this New York firm, or, did he say it in those terms or not? This is a classic example. We see it over and over. The council flexing their muscle and reasserting, hey, we are the power of the purse. We are the legislative body here. And we've seen kind of that power struggle grow since the Lightfoot administration. It's just another one of those latest battles here. The same folks that are kind of part of that, they don't like to hear it, but that corporate caucus in a sense.
Well, and there's so much regret over everyone that ultimately approved the first parking meter deal that I think there's so much fear if we don't read this closely, we're going to screw ourselves over politically again.
Yeah, I think it's probably a good practice for members of the city council to be
read
in
stuff.
to have more than 2 weeks, that'd be great.
Yes, I think we can agree on that.
And to your point, it's the same group that also, was all against the corporate head tax,
Excellent,
right?
yeah.
And pushed for that alternative budget that we ended up seeing at the end of last year.
Yeah.
Interesting thing about all of this, though, I think, is that Mayor Johnson is the one who really has to wear the jacket with regard to the city's finances. And like I said, I think he's being incredibly creative with some of the ideas, selling debt, all these other things. It's a tight spot. So, yeah.
Yeah, a hugely structurally imbalanced budget that he wasn't responsible for imbalancing.
Well, and this is like kind of a precursor of, I think, the posture we're going to see from these same people heading into the budget season, which kind of kicks off end of this month. So I think it's just people kind of like warming up.
Yep.
Flex those muscles before we dive right in. Yeah, fair enough. All right, Brandon, the Bears say they're looking primarily at Hammond, Indiana, but there's maybe a chance. Governor Pritzker says he's happy to call a special session if Illinois lawmakers can come together and come up with a stadium bill. How likely does that seem right now, coming off this last session?
I'm skeptical that a special session could come together, just based off how Pritzker has operated in the past. And we're all tired of this Bears Stadium.
Yep.
Aren't we?
So
I think we're all tired of it.
We're done.
At the end of the day, I'm curious what the political implications are going to be, because I think Pritzker is perfectly fine in his eyes sitting here and putting the onus on the Bears and saying, hey, I'm protecting taxpayers. For him politically, whether it's locally or for 2028 presidentially, if he ever decides to run, that fits in line with what I think the message he wants to go for, and the same for Illinois legislators overall. The Bears here, they've got to decide, are you going to really go to Hammond, which seems like it's got its own problems right now without the actual location, specs and everything done yet, or do the Arlington move, or is Chicago actually a real possibility? That seems out of the question too, because Michael Reese, they've already said they don't like it. And
never say never in any of these situations. Stuff has gone sideways so many times that I'm not making bets on anything except that no one will have their stuff together in time for special session. I feel pretty solid about that.
I do think it really is down to Arlington Heights or Hammond, though. I think Chicago's out.
Yeah, I think that's probably a fair bet to say.
Let's take bets.
Yeah, right.
Because if you stay on the lakefront, it's going to take taxpayer dollars.
Right.
And I don't think Johnson's going to want to eat that either, especially going into a mayor's race where he's already kind of going to have some headwinds.
Yeah, and we heard the governor this week, Sasha, reiterate that the Bears didn't play things very well in Springfield, and also point out the fact that there's a lot of work to do on this Hammond site, so even if they don't come back until the veto session in November, there's still time, but no love lost between the governor, state lawmakers, the Bears.
No love lost at all. Governor Pritzker was incredibly frustrated, and he's pointing all fingers to the team, and so it'll be interesting to see how this wraps up. But I think he's just as fed up as the rest of us.
Well, it's nice to know we're all on the same page on this one.
I mean, you talk to Southsiders, I think many of them are just like, put it in Hammond.
Right.
It's closer to us.
Right. We go there for gas anyway. Who cares? That's where my Costco is. Why not?
People are going to stay in Chicago anyway.
Yep, absolutely.
I just grocery shopped there yesterday.
Well, there you go. All right, proving the point. All right. Pretty horrifying scene downtown this week after someone set fire to a cross in Grant Park. Alden folks have released a picture of the person of interest. So far, no word beyond that. I don't even really have a question here, but this is something that cannot go unremarked upon.
For sure, and I don't think it even requires a question. I think just the mere image, the video, even just saying, there was a burning cross in Grant Park, in downtown Chicago in 2026, kind of says it all. It requires no words, no description or anything. It sends a very chilling effect, particularly among members of the African American community who know the history, who know the weight, who know what it represents, and who knows the violence that was committed. I mean, it's essentially, think of the swastika being a calling card for Nazi Germany and the Holocaust and all of that pain and suffering, and the burning cross is essentially that emblem for Black Americans.
Yeah, I think of the woman who was driving by and who took the video that we've all seen. I think she was running errands with her daughter in the car, and she was just highly confused. Is this a religious thing? Is this a racial thing? Of course, she's a Black woman as well, and she was also thinking of that history. And Father Pfleger, as we know, is now putting up a $10,000 reward if folks have information that they can share to bring that suspect forward. But I mean, that picture, I think, that image is pretty clear. I mean, if you know this guy,
I would hope that someone would step forward.
I would hope so too.
Yeah, something I hope to never have to report on again in my career.
Yeah.
All right, AD, some frustrating news for Cook County property owners, I should say, once again this year. What's going on with the tax bills here?
So bills will be approximately 2 months late. I never want to speak with any certainty anymore.
Okay, fair
about
enough.
The order of property tax.
Kind of like the Bears deal.
Yeah, right.
The last couple of years, I feel like this is my whole world. So this is kind of a cascading leftover from all of last year's problems. The way the property tax system works, it's all a series of handoffs from office to office. So last year's delays have kind of rolled into this year. On top of that, we're still in the middle of an upgrade of the county's taxing systems, which is going okay. That is not what's screwing up this year's bills, but it is another continuing worry for other parts of the property tax system. So the good news is for school districts, library districts, suburban taxing bodies in general, the county, if folks are really in need, has started a zero interest loan program to help them get over that budget hump. Last year we saw a lot of districts troubled because they're essentially waiting for this money to get through the rest of their fiscal year.
Right.
They count on it. They have no power over whether or when it comes in. There's still some districts who have been overpaid and underpaid. There's just a lot still to untangle and a lot of upset folks.
Even with that sort of bridge loan fund, though, you heard from some officials in the county that are really not pleased about this.
They have had it for many months.
Officially.
They've had it officially 4 months, but this is the first time they've gotten in front of commissioners and in front of the leaders of these property tax offices and basically said, get it together. We can't go through this again. In part because they're hearing from their own boards, their own constituents saying, you're pressing pause on this capital planning thing. We can't get a new air conditioner. You can't, some people were worried about making payroll. So this was their first chance to kind of sound off and tell tax officials, I don't care what you got to do, get it done.
Well, I was going to ask if the county is still actually looking at or trying to throw blame on this new system or operating system they're using from this Texas company. Is that still
not for bills now, but for a bunch of other stuff that's still ongoing.
Yeah.
So part of that is also like school districts, library districts don't know. So the money they have received, they got money, but they don't know what fiscal year to count it towards. So none of them can finish their audits, which are a big deal. Some of them got bond rating downgrades because they couldn't make payments on time because they were expecting this money. So there are still lingering problems with that Tyler system, but that's not exactly what's contributing to the late bills. There's just so many problems that everyone owns a little piece and everrone's mad.
It's a little cornucopia. No one's happy with any of the things inside of it.
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay, great. All right, Brandon, it's been a who's who of folks at the first Rainbow Push Coalition conference, the first since Reverend Jackson died. Governor Pritzker, former Secretary of State Clinton, former Transportation Secretary Buttigieg, Reverend Al Sharpton. You reported from the Reverend's memorial services. How important was it for the folks that you talked to try and keep his legacy alive, including through things like this big conference?
Absolutely. Salient important for so many of them, especially at a time where we just saw the Voting Rights Act completely obliterated. That is something that Reverend Jesse Jackson was very passionate about, was getting people to the polls, especially people of color. The big question for Rainbow Push with this conference and really after this conference is going to be, and they've been dealing with this for a while, how relevant is the organization today? And under Yusuf Jackson, the son of Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr., what is the path forward? How do you modernize? How do you bring in new people? That's going to be a big question swirling around the conference, already has been right now, as we get into the years ahead, because this is an institution, but it was largely off the back of a giant. Now that giant is gone, can it stay there and still be as purposeful and relevant to political action in a changing political landscape?
Yeah, it'll be very interesting to see what the future brings, but certainly an interesting lineup just this year alone.
Oh yeah, Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, wow, that's a name. All right, another big event, World Cup underway. Supposed to bring folks together, but Alden, we're hearing from from teams, from fans who are concerned about some of the harsh immigration policies in place right now. I mean, is this potentially affecting the United States' reputation with something that should be kind of a showcase moment for us?
It's certainly a flashpoint, I think, perhaps to confirm some kind of hard feelings that might already exist with regard to what's been happening here with immigration. You run the gamut from the first Trump administration to this one. All the list of countries that are banned, where there have been more intense immigration enforcement for folks arriving from these countries. This is just kind of like another log on that pile, particularly at a moment for an event that literally the globe, outside of the Olympics, I don't know if there's any other sporting event that brings all the globe's countries together the way the World Cup does.
Yeah, absolutely.
I do think it's really fun, though, to see these people come from European countries and discover.
Have you seen this guy, Freddie?
Yes. Here in Chicago?
Yeah.
Not in Chicago. There's a guy on Twitter, if you're still on Twitter, there's a guy, Freddie, German flag. He's been driving from place to place across the country and just like marveling at how beautiful our scenery is, but also going to places like Buc-ee's
the
and
American
like Waffle
South.
House and having an absolute blast.
Good man.
And like restoring my faith in the goodness of
He's having a time. American culture, they're soaking it up. I just saw a great video. The Japanese soccer fans and Mexican soccer fans couldn't bring tequila into the venue in Kansas City, so they decided, hey, we're going to chug it out here
together.
Sport brings people together.
They found a solution.
Tequila brings people together. Yeah, it was quite the video, and they were taking some big swigs in there. It's like they're going to have a very interesting time at that game.
That's football for you.
Absolutely.
Tequila, you better take us ahead.
You better be ready for it. Well, no tequila out here on the set tonight, but we did have a great time with the four of you.
That's what I came here for.
Unfortunately, we are. I know. Next time, we are out of time. So our thanks to Alden Lowry, A.D. Quigg, Sasha Ann Simons, and Brandon Pope. And we're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the Alexandra and John Nichols family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And that's our show for this Friday night. Be sure to join us next Thursday for Chicago Tonight, opening day in Jackson Park. We'll have an inside look at the Obama Presidential Center as it opens on the city's south side. That's Thursday at 5:30 and 10 on WTTW. Now for all of us here at the Week in Review, I'm Nick Blumberg. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy, stay safe, and stay informed. Have a great weekend. All right, Sasha, folks think about Lake Michigan, they think about beach days or swimming or fishing. You talked to some folks this week who treat our lake like the deep blue sea. Tell us about that.
They definitely do. For World Oceans Day, we had a panel of enthusiasts on, and we went into the backstory of a scuba diving certification organization that actually originates here in the Chicago suburbs. So now that you can go out and scuba safely and you can get good training and you don't hear all these instances of people, dying by diving, that's thanks to Chicago. You know how they say all the cool things happen here in the city?
Oh yeah.
That is very true, a very true statement. And also, shipwrecks are still a thing. They're still around.
Yeah.
You can check out the Silver Spray at 47th. You can still see pieces of shipwrecks. And
Aren't there like planes near Navy Pier?
there are,
Whoa.
there
Sunken
are. So we dug into all of
Like
that.
World War II.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that serves the needs of clients in the Chicago area and throughout the nation.